The idea that Silicon Valley is defining how humans will interact in the future is the most perverse thing that's ever happened in the history of society. And I think there's some truth there. I mean, at the end of the day, some of these things are, I mean, they're driven to keep you engaged, and they're driven to keep you engaged through a variety of different means. But they produce those little dopamine hits that really keep you going over and over and over again and wanting more.
Still scrambling for supplies like it's 1999? ODP Business Solutions streamlines everything from pencils to projectors so you can focus on what matters, making an impact. Visit odpbusiness.com/education to learn more. That's odpbusiness.com/education. As districts look ahead to the coming school year, the groundwork starts earlier than you might think. The way professional learning is designed can shape culture, collaboration, and stability long before students arrive. Frontline Education's 2026 K-12 Lens Report takes a closer look at how districts are connecting professional growth to stronger staffing stability. Download the full report at frontlineeducation.com/leaders to learn more. That's frontlineeducation.com/leaders. IXL is a go-to support for classroom teachers because its adaptive platform makes differentiated instruction easy. See for yourself and get started today at ixl.com/leaders. That's ixl.com/leaders. The best leadership coaches, they don't hand you an answer. They help you discover the insight yourself through curiosity and inquiry. Questions that help you see your situation differently. That's exactly what Digital Danny does. And you can get started with him at myprincipalcoach.com/ruckus. That's myprincipalcoach.com/ruckus. All right. And Kris, welcome back to the show.
Thank you. Very happy to be here. Thank you for the invitation.
There's not a ton of people that have been on the show multiple times. Mitch Weathers, who's become a close friend, he's on all the time, right? But nobody has been on in two spots in such a condensed amount of time. So whatever that is, maybe we're gonna 3D print an award for you and send it to your house.
I love that idea.
Amazing.
Well, thank you. I'm glad to be back. Honored to be here.
Yeah, and just to give some context, to whoever's listening or viewing, we did a show with Kris recently, and it was really well received by y'all. So we'll have that linked up if you want to catch the first one. Definitely want to do that. We talked a lot about AI, of course, screen time with students. Kris is over at Play Piper as well, and they're doing some really great stuff with their kids over there. And I just thought it'd be fun to have another conversation. When Riverside, of course, did my annual wrap up, everybody does a Spotify wrap up now, right? Everybody has stolen that. Of course, AI was the number one topic covered on the show. And I think that, that's not going to slow down or stop anytime soon. But maybe we should start because kind of recent news in terms of, I think it was Meta and YouTube brought to court. Lost, I think, a big case there, and that had to do with, I guess, intentionally building stuff that's harmful for kids. But just would love to hear, sort of your thoughts and what you saw happening and playing out in real time.
Yeah, I mean that's a pretty big judgment. Not necessarily financially for either of those companies, but
sure.
I think. Probably in a statement of what's been happening and what is happening. I think that's a pretty big statement. When we look at screen time and how much, kids in particular are spending on screens, that's certainly a big motivator, to be there. And that's certainly something that keeps them coming back and keeps them staring at these little screens. And I think that indictment says a lot. I go back to what I think I said in the last time because it is it's I don't have a whole lot of memorized quotes, but
But
the
this
one
is one of them.
that I do have memorized is from I think I'm saying his name wrong too, but Jerome Lanier, who was the godfather of virtual reality, who at a conference on learning and digital learning and games and learning in 2013, I think it was 2012, 2013. Learning Without Frontiers was the conference. He was giving his talk, and he said that the idea that Silicon Valley is defining how humans will interact in the future is the most perverse thing that's ever happened in the history of society. And
Yeah.
I think I think there's some truth there. You know, I mean, at the end of the day, some of these things are, I mean, they're driven to keep you engaged, and they're driven to keep you engaged through a variety of different means. But they produce those little dopamine hits that really keep you going over and over and over again and wanting more. And I mean, I would suggest that the quality of the experience perhaps isn't all that fundamentally great, right? I mean, it's something that we are continually addicted to. I've certainly noticed, you know, I see my usage patterns.
Mm.
I've changed the way that I do some things. You know, I don't have, I think my biggest social media now is LinkedIn, where I tend to post more business and study research related things. I think the second to that is probably Twitter or X as it is now. But I use a lot less of that because I find myself battling more with trying to just see what I want to see versus what the algorithm wants me to see, and I think that that's part
Yeah.
of it. So I think that those changes are. I think that those indictments are important, and those you know those court cases are important, and I'm hopeful that maybe the result of that will start to change the way that we define and interact with some of these things. Back in 2013, I think it was, and this is on YouTube somewhere. Uh, I did a an hour long talk about screen usage, and this was not long after the iPhone was around. And of course, I think as you know, we're in very much the same space here. When you look at EdTech materials across the board, from not just within schools, but in the professional environments as well, um, the new and shiny is always something that comes in. So about that time, mobile learning was the new shiny thing. So everybody had their iPhones, and so the talk that I gave centered around the fact that this is a really powerful environment. You know, we have these little boxes that are the gateways to all human knowledge at this point, right? Which I think is close to a fair statement. But the experience of that, I think, is something that needs to be very well thought out. And I think at the time, and I still used one of the things that had just come out, if I'm not mistaken, was the Pokemon Go game,
Mm.
which I found fascinating because I thought that was a really interesting use and blending of experience and screen, right? Because you're being active, you're out chasing things, hopefully not running into traffic, which was my only
Yeah.
criticism.
Right.
You know,
Absolutely. Yeah.
and yeah, I said, you know, this is my only criticism. Like this, you know, this could become an issue. But the screen is kind of merely one element of the rest of the world. And I thought that that was a pretty unique way to handle that and to do that. And it really followed along with some of the other things that I was seeing at the same time. I think it was BMW famously had a pretty impressive video where they were showing somebody wearing glasses, which at the time, Google Glass was the thing, and now, you know, we've got Meta glasses and
Right.
and a number of different competitors there. But you know, the idea was the technician is looking at the car and physically working with the mechanics of the car to solve the problem, you know, the actual engine and such, but is being guided by overlays. And this was, of course, a big thing that was also occurring in the DoD space as well. So I think that there's a tremendous amount of use. It's just that what is being put into the system directly feeds what is coming out of the system. And so those court cases, in my humble little mind, suggest that what's being put into the system is not as beneficial as what's being taken out. So,
Yeah.
or isn't producing the benefit that's being taken out, I should say.
Yeah, couple notes on that. Thinking about the algorithm and Facebook used to be such a big place for me because it was actual social media could build relationships, network, that kind of thing. And these days, if I open it up, it might be like one out of 12 people that I actually know, right? It's like it's
Mhm.
all framed so that it feels familiar, but it's
Right.
all just stuff trying to get me sucked in, clicking in, et cetera, et cetera. I try to delete that or hide it as much as
Yeah.
possible, but it's me fighting
It's
the
yeah,
algorithm.
I mean, it's arguably, it's also rage, right? I mean, that's what keeps you
Yeah,
involved, right? Because
for
you read
sure, for
these
sure.
opinions that are the opposite of yours, but they're presented in such a way that gets you going, so then you start diving deeper and further, and so then, I mean, I guess the question is, how's that work for kids? I mean,
Yeah,
it
exactly.
when kids get sucked into these things, and so, because the algorithm, I want to think that the algorithm is perhaps modified or tweaked for kids, but, it may not be either, right? I know that when you know, uh, there are 4 children in this house, they're ranging, from ages of 8 to 17, and, the 8-year-old, screens are a bit inevitable, right? I mean, we use them at school. That's, all the schools have iPads or Chromebooks. So, the kids wants to use them and they get involved with them. But, sometimes I find, I try to keep a close eye on what the kids are watching. And sometimes the question is, how did you get here? What was in your feed, or what were you looking at? What were you doing that got you to this video or this whatever? And, then we have to kind of curtail that and turn that off and move on.
Hmm. You know, the other thing I'm seeing a lot of on X these days too, Justin Bader, he's over at the Principal Center. I really appreciate his voice. I see Jonathan, I think he pronounced his last name Haight from the Anxious Generation. Uh, I see him all the time posting. And then I had somebody on the show named Emily Churkin. I think she calls herself a screen time consultant, maybe. But I see a lot of people posting like EdTech widely adopted, not a lot of evidence producing great outcomes, So there's I think there's like a growing group of educators just really thinking about, yeah, what is this doing to kids? What are the outputs? What are the outcomes? Is it working for us? Why are we so integrated with it? And it's weird for me to say because I'm the do school different guy. How do we reimagine things? I'm
Mhm.
very bullish on technology and but also thinking about it objectively as well. Like the place and that kind of thing.
Well, but I think the important part here is that, you hit on something that I think really requires pulling the thread a little bit, So your point about, technology and being that kind of, "Hey, we can use this for something better," is I think a very valid point.
Mhm.
One of the challenges, and I see there were two very big challenges that I would suggest here. One is that, I remember when we first started delving into the mobile learning world. The learning world was basically, okay, how are we going to recreate what's on this big screen for this little screen? And that's the wrong way to do it. That's not really
Mhm.
how it should be approached. I think that that was immediately compounded, not immediately, but not too long after in the grand timescale of things, by COVID, because COVID put us in that position where we went from having some online learning in schools to having to have complete online learning in schools. And the
Yeah.
problem is that that transition, which if I were building a course that was not online to become online, that transition would take, I don't know, geez, months, maybe even a year, depending on what the course was, right? But here we were put in a position where we had to make that transition in 3 weeks, 4 weeks.
Mhm.
And that is an impossible situation. And, I think for better for worse, a lot of that just has carried through. So I think there are a number of different possibilities, of how to use this tech and how to make it work. I think the challenge is finding the right thing to make it work, right? I don't I certainly hope that my what I'm saying is not coming across as all ed tech is bad. I don't believe all ed tech is bad. I believe that we have
Right.
tools and we have important pieces that really can make a difference in fundamentally how people work with these materials, right? Um, Being able to understand something and try something via simulation and then put that into work in a physical manner is a hugely important piece. That's fundamentally that's somewhat how robots are programmed, right? We start in the simulation world and we've got the models and the physics and we get the robots to do the things, and then once we have that, we get that to the actual physical robot and get the physical robots to do the thing that we just simulated. So I think that there's a lot of opportunity there. It's just a matter of really coming across the particular implementations that make the most sense, right? And
Mm.
I don't believe those implementations are the implementations that have users staring at a screen for the majority of the time.
Plugged into the matrix.
Yes, plugged into the Matrix. I just watched that the other night, so it's an
Well,
interesting watch if you haven't watched it in a while. When you consider the place of AI right now and things that are happening,
yeah, I'm gonna
and
have to
it
pull. I
also
think I
also I think it's worth pointing out because the Matrix is something that I've talked about in the past, right?
okay. I
I
didn't know
don't know
that.
that we talked about it the last time we talked, but
No,
there's the
no.
whole scene, and this was the learning scene. There are 2 points in that movie that are I think folks, when they look at learning and the future of learning, reference, but the one that I always enjoyed was, the scene they're trying to rescue Morpheus, who's been, abducted by the agents and is being, held in this thing, and they get up to the rooftop, and there's a helicopter,
Mm.
and, Neo's character is like, "Well, what are we gonna do?" And he's there with Trinity. He says, "No problem. I got this." And, makes the phone call and says, "I need to learn how to fly a Bell 212 helicopter." So just like that, she's like, "Okay, let's go." They get in the helicopter and they take off and they fly. Okay. Amazing. Great idea. Here's the problem. Trinity does not learn how to fly a helicopter. She learns how to simulate a helicopter. She's no
Mm.
idea how to fly a helicopter once she's unplugged from that experience. So
Mm.
in that realm, what we're doing is looking at the simulation and saying, well, this is the future of learning, but it's not, because really it's just the future of simulation, not
Mm.
the future of actual practice. At least that's how I've always seen it. And that's how I've always read that scene. So whenever I heard or we talk about the Matrix, I think that that's always a pretty prescient example of something that perhaps is interpreted one way, but the reality is it's not how it's working.
Yeah, reality is a whole nother ballgame. AI is really funny. I'm working with it every day, all day, and if you're not careful, it's like the confirmation bias, or the fact that it thinks your ideas are so good, and you feel like you have these foolproof plans, right? And then you
Mhm.
bring it to the world. You take it out of the simulation, and
Yeah.
you bring it to the real world, and it falls flat on its face, right? But you were
Yeah.
so confident that it was going to work. And it's interesting, like whatever the implications of that'll be, because if you stop, if you give over all your decision making ability, critical thinking, this kind of stuff to the machine, and just be like, oh yeah, that's the route to go,
Right.
right? And then it
Well,
doesn't work out.
yeah. Well, I mean, look, AI is an amazing tool. It really is. It's a phenomenal tool. And I think there's a lot of places that we can go with it, and there's a lot of places that we can talk about. There are certainly a lot of ethical implications.
Mhm.
Find myself, really studying that and researching that a lot more. But it's a tool at the end of the day, and I think it's important to have that tool in the classroom. I really do. We have this. I think when we really look at the scope of how things are going in the world, we've got the view that we have in the US, and I mean, just for the purposes of our conversation, the view we've got in the US, and we've got the view that's coming out of China, right? And it's
Yeah.
interesting to watch the different viewpoints because in China, AI implementation, robotics implementation is just a thing. It is an integrated thing within the culture. It does this. This is how it works. It is a tool. There are in Shenzhen, China, right now. Their robots are being deployed on the streets for different things. They've got drones that do traffic. They've got the typical things you would think robots would do. And what's really interesting is to look at the messaging behind that, because if you look at some of the papers that come out of Asia and some of the stories, it is, hey, traffic robot implemented in Shenzhen, this is what it's doing. And then if you look at the Western implementation of that, it is dark robotic
Let me
overlords monitoring your driving
and taking your jobs, right?
and taking your jobs.
So,
Yeah.
yeah.
And I think we're at a really interesting point right now with AI, and it's difficult and troubling. It's a tool. It is certainly going to affect the job market for sure. I have
Mhm.
very close friends who are being impacted by AI, and they're writers, and
Mm.
that's troubling. But I also think that the job opportunities that come out of this kind of will eventually equate. It's a rebalancing, like it's always been a rebalancing, right? I mean,
Mhm.
when the loom came
Yeah.
out, the automated loom came out in the 1800s, that was an issue, but that rebalanced. It's a matter of getting there. And I think understanding these tools and getting them into the educational system is going to be a huge critical part of that, and presenting
Yeah.
them not in the dark overlords way. Yeah, I mean, although I do have a tendency to say please and thank you to my AI agents all the time, because I want
Same.
them to remember that.
Just yeah.
That's a whole different. I have a whole different philosophy and idea behind that. But in terms of how we're doing this in education, I think it's important. I just took my PhD qualifiers at the university I'm studying, and this was the first year that they changed them, because
Mm.
in past years they were having issues with students using AI to write their papers and do things. I don't necessarily disagree with those changes. I think it's important that if you are going for a PhD program, or if you are learning to write, that you actually learn how to write. AI is a
For
great
sure.
tool for that, but you know, if we, to your point, if we lose this critical thinking skills, where do we end up? I
Yeah.
think that's part of what makes us human and what makes us all function.
ODP Business Solutions, formerly Office Depot Business Solutions Division, has been a trusted partner for schools for 30 years. At ODP Business Solutions, we're by your side to meet your evolving education needs. Let's talk about what keeps Ruckus Makers up at night: creating engaging learning spaces while juggling budgets, safety protocols, and those endless supply lists. Here's the game changer: ODP Business Solutions helps you tackle it all. We're not just another vendor, we're your strategic partner in transformation. Want to turn a tired computer lab into a STEAM innovation center? We'll help design it. Need to keep 8 schools stocked and spotless? We've got sustainable solutions that scale. Looking to upgrade from whiteboards to interactive displays? We'll guide you through the entire process. And the best part, you can get it all from a single supplier. That helps you simplify ordering and streamline budgeting while staying compliant with easy access to cooperative contracts. However you want to advance, ODP Business Solutions has 30 years of experience helping districts like yours get ahead. Visit odpbusiness.com/education to learn more. That's odpbusiness.com/education. Summer sets the tone. When the professional learning is intentional and built for collaboration, it can strengthen culture before the year even begins. Frontline Education's 2026 K-12 Lens survey report found staffing pressure has eased overall, but gaps still remain. Districts reporting easier hiring are more likely to have professional growth that's structured and targeted to individual goals. So learning carries well beyond onboarding and supports ongoing improvement. Nearly half of districts that use software to manage and provide professional growth say hiring has gotten easier compared to 30% that don't use software. Download the full K-12 Lens report at frontlineeducation.com/leaders to see the data and the practices behind stronger culture and retention. You can get that report at frontlineeducation.com/leaders. Teachers love the support that IXL provides in the classroom, and Ruckus Makers love it all as well because IXL also gives school leaders meaningful insights on every level. Put your finger on the pulse of student performance with IXL and its dashboard to drill down to see progress and growth for individual students. You can even customize reports to hone in on the information that matters most to you. IXL helps Ruckus Makers make data-informed decisions that will benefit their students' growth goals. Get started today at ixl.com/leaders. That's ixl.com/leaders. Here's something I tell all principals I work with. There's two sides to every coin. The story you've been telling yourself about your campus. Our parents don't engage, our teachers, they just won't change. This is just how it is here. That's not necessarily reality. It's just one side of the coin. That's a story you decided to be true. But there's another side to that story and to that coin that is equally valid. One that probably positions everything you're saying in a much more generous light. The language and the story you're telling yourself, it really matters. It's the same situation, but depending on the lens and the perspective you take, you are a completely different leader. That's one move that Digital Danny is built for to make with you. He's not going to agree with your comfortable story. He's going to push on you, right? In the way that I would, with the same questions, drawn from 10 plus years of experience coaching school leaders just like you. That reframes the entire game. It could be a game changer for you. Get started with Digital Danny and reframe the story you've been telling yourself at myprincipalcoach.com/ruckus. Get started at myprincipalcoach.com/ruckus. There's a new guy in my network. I'm enjoying speaking to him too, Corey Kosick. He's at a company called Orchard.careers. And so he's thinking deeply about how to prepare kids for the future and knowing that counselors are overloaded and et cetera, and not to put kids sort of on a linear path like, oh, you take some kind of assessment. That means you're a doctor, you're an engineer, right? Like really having something that's more robust and personalized and giving you a lot of different ways to explore, right? So anyways, he's out there and is powered by AI and he's talking to districts, and the constraint that he's facing is that some folks want to adopt it, but by folks, I mean, systems. But they're stopped, they're slowed down because they don't even have an AI policy yet. Like it doesn't, like in 2026, not even a draft of a policy of how to make decisions around AI, which I find that to be amazing.
I don't necessarily know that I do find that to be amazing. There should be, at this point, you're right. There should be some considerations, but this is moving so fast.
Sure.
How do we keep up with it? And
Yeah,
I think those are some of the fundamental questions. I see, the discussions that Richard Coletta from ISTE has, because they focus a lot on AI and what that looks like in school, because that's, I've sat in the rooms, that's the hottest topic, right? 90% of the people want to talk about AI and what that means in their classroom. And I think it's important. I also believe that it's a challenge because there are two different aspects to this, right? The first aspect is, okay, how do we deal with AI when kids are able to just say, I need a paper on this and boom, it's done. The second is, how do we can't ignore this stuff. I mean, unless somebody comes and just pulls the giant plug, which is very unlikely to happen because that has to be a global thing. We can't ignore it. So how do we teach it, and how do we build those things that really allow for that education to be useful, in the sense of, hey, these are tools and this is what we can and can't do with them, and I mean, to your point, I find it fascinating. I use AI quite a bit, particularly for coding. Now I don't necessarily code too much anymore as much as I used to because I've got this machine that can do it. And yes, the machine can't quite do it perhaps as well as I could in some cases. I think that's getting much better now. I
Mhm.
know that there are certainly companies that are now not hiring junior programmers because they can
Developers,
get
yeah.
AI to do it and then have their senior programmers review it. So then the question becomes, well, then how do we get more senior programmers? I tend to think that again, if you look at it like a tool, that's kind of your path, right? You're going to know that you're going to want to learn how the code is structured. You're going to want to learn the semantics. I tend to refer to this as the fact that code is becoming philosophy rather than engineering at this point. And I
Explain what you
believe
mean
you're
by that.
well, I think, the base of this message is that we now have these tools that do these things, right?
Yeah.
But the tools only do as good of a job based upon what we give that machine, that those tools to do the job. So if I say, build me a website that scrapes this data and shows me all the relationships, right? That's exactly what it's going to do.
Yeah.
So what I need to do as the person that's using this tool is to say, okay, how do I define what data I need, how I want it to be displayed, perhaps what tool sets I want to use because I've got a target platform for it. How do I give that information, those thought processes to the system to do the work that I needed to be done?
Mhm.
And as a junior level program, that kind of thinking process, I think, is going to be more and more critically important. So you know, we start to look at how we are structuring these things versus how we are building these things, right? So that kind of philosophical viewpoint as to what we're doing with this code or what we're describing makes a lot of difference versus saying, I need this if then loop to do this, right?
Right, right.
Uh,
Want to share a resource, tell a short story. Resources, there's a book called A Beautiful Constraint. I don't know if you've ever come across that, but based on what you're sharing there, I think that might be a good read for anybody, enjoying this show and thinking about how to get better outputs. I think constraints are maybe a piece of that puzzle. So the short story, I don't know if you've seen any of the videos, totally doesn't bother me if you have not. Digital Danny, right? He's alive and well, and he could support school leaders. And the first version of him was candidly a very average tool, right?
cool.
And that's because in terms of setting him up, I gave him very few constraints. He had access to everything that I've created over a decade, right?
Mhm.
Now, interestingly, people still found value in that. And there was one individual who had 910 conversations from August to December, 5 months, right? Which is interesting. So I had a call with him, found out, what are you using them for? Where does he get stuck? Where's the value, et cetera, et cetera. And the version two got 100x better by giving it constraints. Four
Mhm.
jobs to be done. Focus on those. Don't make up stuff outside of those jobs and keep your focus there. And a whole lot more in terms of instructions of how to interact and work and yeah, provide feedback, to school leaders that might use it. And version one from August to December, not a lot of messages to me from people using him. Version two, once I let people know he's upgraded, give it another try. Lots of messages coming in. Oh, I can't believe how good it works, et cetera, et cetera. But I think it's because, like you said, the thoughtfulness of, okay, where's the data coming from? What kind of
Mhm.
answers are you going to provide? It was, I put so much more effort into version two as I should,
Mhm.
right? Over version one. But the output, I don't know. Let's say I put 10 times more effort into version two. The output is exponentially better, right?
Yeah.
So it's not like a direct correlation. I don't. Hopefully that makes sense to
No,
you,
I
whoever's
think it
watching
does.
this.
No, I
Yeah.
think it does, and I think that that's really the kind of driving point. That's where we're going here. We're moving from this narrative where we, had to spend a lot of time focusing on the code itself to now changing to where, we're allowed or we're putting in ourselves in a position where we have to focus more on the design and the philosophy of how these things work, right? It's not just I'm going to build a calculator. It is I'm going to build a specific calculator and I want it to look like this and act like this and function like this. And how do we write those instructions so that when we give them to the tool does the thing.
Yeah.
And the calculator is a simple thought, right? Because think about the complex systems that exist. And I
Mhm.
mean, look, the code is philosophy idea. I mean, I based that on a couple of years ago, and I think it's still somewhat prevalent. In the blockchain world, you had distributed autonomous organizations, which were basically these self-governing companies that existed on blockchain, and even within some of the blockchain and crypto components that made them function, the idea was code is law, right?
Mhm.
So the
Oh,
law
yeah,
of
yeah,
how
yeah.
these things work is in the
Mhm,
code.
mhm,
So I
mhm.
think it's a bit of a riff on that, given what we're able to do in terms of building these solutions. And it's fast and it's impressive. And I think those are the things that we really want to try to harness when we're talking about AI in education, because it gives you the ability to say, look, you've got a tool that can do these amazing things. You've got a tool that can write these papers, but you really need to think about what it is that you want it to be. You need to think about how you want to implement it. And that's
Mhm.
not an endorsement for AI writing your papers. That is saying that in the same way that if you are not using AI to write papers, you want to put the thought into the paper,
Yeah.
you want to do that if
Well,
you're trying to use AI.
you got an assignment or a project for students, and if you just like, summarize the War of 1812 versus, something that's going to be a lot more
Yeah.
distinct and robust or whatever, you're going to get different outputs from your human students.
Yeah.
So, last personal example, and then I want you to pretend you're a principal. But,
Sure.
to give people some hope, optimism, like, yeah, disruptions are coming. Replaced by Claude is coming, as you were telling me in the
Yeah.
pre chat before we hit record. Interestingly, as I talk about what I'm building for school leaders, there's a lot of folks just in business that have contacted me for consulting, whatever, right?
Mhm.
Just because they find it, and how might I integrate it over here in this space,
Yeah.
which I find fascinating. And I think, on, well, not somewhat on accident, but because I'm such a learner, right?
Mhm.
Uh, this is now a skill set, right? That I could support others with. And so now with your principal, I want you to pretend you're a principal running a campus, knowing that you can, I mean, the canvas is blank, it's wide open, which is scary, but also full of possibility. But how might you think about stuff you might build for yourself as a school leader, for your campus, for your parents, your students? It's a pretty big
Yeah.
question, but
It's a
I don't
huge
know. Is this,
question, and,
yeah,
I mean, first of all, yeah, I mean, just the mere thought of being a principal on a school campus, is highly overwhelming, the amount of respect I have for the things that they do and what they have to deal with, because
yeah,
um, the reality is that, maybe to your question, it would be great to be able to do that, but I know that even principals have somebody that they have to respond to, and school boards and things like that.
Mhm,
So I
mhm.
guess that, what would I do to make all of these things work? What kind of design would I have here? Boy, that is a big question.
yeah.
uh,
Maybe it's really, really shame on me, Danny, for asking that type of
no,
thing.
I mean, I think it's a reasonable question, and I think it's a thoughtful one. And I mean, that's a great thought exercise, right? So, anybody that's listening to this, maybe pause. What would you do? Write that down. What would you do? And the principals that may be watching this are probably all like, man, I wish it were that easy and we could just make all this stuff work. But there's
Yeah.
other factors that we all have to consider.
Here's
Look,
another provocation though. Like
yeah,
like I had my one of my mentors, Christopher Lockhead, said, pretend just kill your company right now, build something new where AI
yeah,
was your co-founder. What would you
okay,
build? Right. So
yeah,
I think another really interesting thought experiment would just be like, say you're hired, today's day one, and
hmm,
you're stepping on the campus.
yeah,
How would you co-principal with AI? Maybe that's another way to think about it.
yeah. I think that's in some ways a bit of an easier question. I mean, AI is the thing about AI that makes it interesting and powerful is that it's drawing upon all of this knowledge that we've really built into it, right? So when you think about how these models are built and what they do, they're built in and integrated into a system in such a manner that things work, right? And they work based upon past experience because that's the data set that comes in. So what's cool about AI in that particular realm is that if I say, "Hey, I need you to build me a curriculum on, the history of, I don't know, World War II or the history of AI or cybernetics or anything to that extent." I'm going to get a really interesting curriculum. And it's probably going to be, although I would definitely want to check the references, it's probably going to be pretty solid and pretty straightforward. So what that leaves me to do is focus on the human element, right?
Mhm.
Which AI cannot do. AI may claim that it has emotions and all these things. It does not, that we know of. I can talk about AI and consciousness ad nauseum for a long period of time, but it's still not. It doesn't have the experiences that we have. So if I'm working with an AI, and that's my co-principal, I'm going to let that AI focus on exactly the materials and perhaps the structure, but I'm going to focus on the human elements of that. How do we make this work for people so that people get to be people and interact and grow up and be social and do all the things that I think make us explicitly human?
Mhm.
And that would be my simple answer for that. And I mean, you had mentioned our kind of pre-roll conversation, and one of the things I keep thinking about, and I've seen this is getting a little bit more traction as well, is the question: do people say please and thank you to their AIs when they use them? Right. And when I've been thinking about that, I know Sam Altman says that it costs tens of millions of dollars a year because people are doing that. And I do, to his credit, I do believe he said, but it's worth it. And I tend to agree with that. AI can do these great things, but we still need to learn to be human. And I think the act of saying please and thank you is that human nature that we already have that we want to push forward and continue to see within ourselves. And I think that, back to the screens and those notions, and again, the notion of social media, social media in its way kind of destroyed the social contract that we've had forever, because social media
Mhm.
doesn't mean that I'm talking to you. It means that I'm talking to a glass screen. And it's a lot easier for me to say things that I probably shouldn't say to a glass screen than it is if I'm looking you in the eye, because there's that human aspect. What my concern is, has that all disappeared? Because now what's the difference? Right.
Mhm.
So if I'm the co-principal, I'm focusing on the human elements and how to make these things functional and how to make sure that the critical thinking is there. We need that. We especially need that now. We're going to need a lot of scientists in the next generation. So if you lose your critical thinking, that becomes a dangerous situation.
Well, I really enjoyed our second conversation here, Kris. Of everything we've discussed, there was a lot in this episode. What do you think is the one thing you want a ruckus maker to remember?
Going back to what our original conversation was, and I think what a good part of what we had to talk about in this chat was, the screen is an element that's there, but the experience extends beyond the screen. So when you're looking at or designing these platforms, ensure that it is a tool and not the tool, right?
Mm.
Try to ensure that those things that the kids have access to extend beyond what they're staring at. I mean, I think that's a big part of this. Technology is hugely important, but we don't want everything to be super technological. I mean, remember that we're all humans too.
That's right.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Thanks again for being on the show.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me again.
Hey, Ruckus Makers, thanks again for pressing play. I hope you enjoyed the show as much as I enjoyed creating it for you. And before you go, if today's episode shifted something in you so that you want to do school different, or maybe you have a new idea about how to reimagine education on your campus, then check out My Principal Coach. It's your AI-powered leadership mentor. It's trained on 10 years of mastermind and private coaching experience that I've had. It's like having a world-class Ruckus Maker mentor in your pocket 24/7. You can start your free 7-day trial at myprincipalcoach.com.